Hello and welcome back to another video. I'm Robert from Mobile Burn, and today I'll be comparing the Sony Xperia Z Ultra to the 2013 Nexus 7. Both devices have been released over the last couple of months, but with very different target audiences in mind. Since its first release in 2012, the Nexus 7 has been aimed at the value for money audience whilst maintaining some high-end features. The 2013 model refresh certainly keeps this tradition going. The Sony Xperia Z Ultra, on the other hand, is targeting a new niche in the market with super high-end features and huge amounts of power. In terms of footprint, the Xperia is the smaller device of the two, being shorter and narrower with a much slimmer bezel, especially around the sides. Both devices, however, feature quite large bezels at the top and bottom where most of the components are housed. Looking at the devices side by side, you can see how thin the Sony Xperia Z Ultra is at only 6.5mm compared to the 8.7mm of the Nexus 7. ASUS, however, have made a nice job of rounding the edges to make the device feel a lot skinnier than the specs would have you believe. Continuing around the back, the power and volume buttons have remained in the same positions to the previous generation Nexus 7, meaning that they are still quite difficult to access compared to its competitor. Sony have decided to place them quite close together in the middle of the device for ease of access. In terms of build quality, the Nexus 7 is constructed out of a single piece smooth chassis that wraps around the Gorilla Glass front. Alternatively, the Sony is made out of two large pieces of glass covering the front and back of the device, which are being held in place by a metal frame, giving it a premium feel. From a personal point of view, I feel a lot more confident holding the Nexus 7 due to the non-slip rubber back compared to the quite slippery Sony Xperia Z Ultra. Camera-wise, the Sony features an 8MP sensor on the back, which is being complemented by a 2MP front-facing camera, both capable of shooting 1080p video at 30 frames a second. The rear of the Nexus 7 houses a 5MP sensor, able to record videos in Full HD, with the front-facing 1.2MP camera only capable of producing 720p video. The lack of LED flash indicates that neither company intended for the device to be used for photography, other than the occasional snap. The images both devices produce are nothing to shout about, sadly, with image quality being acceptable in very good daylight, but when the light starts to diminish, so does the picture quality. One thing I am really glad about is the upgrade to the stereo speakers compared to the previous generation Nexus 7. The first of the two is located at the top next to the camera, with the other being right down the bottom, split by the micro USB charging port. The location could have been a little bit better, as your hands cover them quite easily during gameplay or when watching a movie. Sony have decided to incorporate its mono speaker into the metal frame at the bottom of the device, also making it quite easy to cover when held in landscape mode. Sadly, it is by far the worst part of the phablet compared to its rival's superior dual speaker layout. One thing that Sony has continued since the release of the Sony Xperia Z is the IP certification, making the devices water and dust proof. This does mean that the micro SIM and micro SD card slot are both covered by fiddly flaps which are quite awkward to open. Sadly, there's no option to expand the memory on the Nexus 7, so it's stuck with either a 16 or 32GB model. Battery-wise, they both feature non-removable batteries, with the Nexus 7 having a larger 3950 mAh capacity compared to the Sony's 3050 mAh. The inclusion of an LTE radio on the Sony Xperia Z Ultra will have a severe impact on running time from a single charge compared to the Wi-Fi only Nexus 7. In day-to-day use, I've managed about twice as much screen on time with the Nexus 7 compared to the Sony, but both will easily last you throughout a day even under heavy usage. Luckily, there is the possibility of charging the Sony via a dedicated dock connector at the side of the device, but the crown has to go to the Nexus 7 with its wireless charging capabilities. Now to the most important part of any mobile device, the display. Both devices feature a Full HD resolution display, easily matching if not surpassing the competition. There is, however, a bit of a difference when it comes to their display technologies. Sony have opted to go for their triluminous display technology with good viewing angles and colour saturation, but compared to the Nexus 7 it is no match. Its backlit IPS panel is far superior in every sense, with unmatched viewing angles as well as colour saturation, making it a joy to use. Sony does, however, have a trick up its sleeve with the inclusion of the ability to use a pencil instead of a stylus to draw directly on the display, making it even more practical than a Galaxy Note, for example. In terms of actual specs, the Sony simply blows the Nexus 7 out of the water, with a top-of-the-range Snapdragon 800 CPU clocked at 2.2 GHz, a massive 2GB of RAM, and the Adreno 330 GPU. Here's a quick look at some of the scores of the most popular benchmarking apps. clear winner after those scores, but let's have a look at how they actually perform in day-to-day use. Both devices fly through their individual UIs without any major hiccups, making their performance difference barely noticeable. The Nexus 7 achieves this fluidity due to its running the latest software, Android 4.3, which comes pre-installed on the device. The Sony, on the other hand, is running the slightly older version of Android 4.2.2, but having said that, there are hardly any differences between the two. In terms of the UI, the Nexus is running a pure version of Android called Vanilla, compared to the Sony, which is running a slightly modified version. Sony's developers have luckily kept the UI changes to a minimum, with only a few tweaks and colour changes here and there, with most of it being very close to a pure Android experience. Overall, both devices have very good specs and usability, but they're aimed at completely different markets. The Nexus 7 is a much cheaper device, as ASUS have made sure only the most important features are taken care of to keep the price to a minimum, like that beautiful high-resolution display. The Sony, on the other hand, has all the bells and whistles with its high-end processor and the software features like the pen input, but with a price to match. Sony's biggest strength, however, is its biggest weakness, as it's trying to be too many devices at the same time. Size-wise, it is far too big to be a phone at 6.4 inches, but too small to be a tablet with proper features and screen real estate. I'm sure it will appeal to a very niche market like people who look for a portable large screen device with the power to match as a secondary device, but I can't see it replacing smartphones anytime soon. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this comparison between the Sony Xperia Z Ultra and the 2013 Nexus 7. Please don't forget to like the video as well as subscribe for more great content, and I hope to see you soon.